a good question. It's similar to the NFL in the way that the NFL is not the only football league. Like there's the XFL, I think United States Football League. I don't know. I'm not a football girly, but I know there's others, but the NFL is like the biggest, baddest one. So in that respect, the UFC is definitely the biggest, baddest MMA organization, and it's not even close. They definitely, I would say, have a lot of the monopoly on the talent. There are totally other great MMA organizations. There's PFL. They recently acquired another big MMA organization called Bellator, but it's now all under PFL right now. One Championship does MMA. Their MMA is not as high level, but it's still MMA, and they also do Muay Thai and stuff as well. There's Cage Warriors, there's Combate Global, and then there's a bunch of other organizations that are like under the UFC in terms of talent that kind of feed their talent into the UFC. And there are hundreds of local pro MMA organizations that you can go and watch fights at. So there are plenty of other promotions, but the UFC is definitely the biggest. Part of the reason why people use the UFC and MMA so synonymously is that the UFC specifically played such a critical role in the development and creation of MMA as a sport. MMA was predicated on this idea that if we put two people from different sports into a ring together, who's going to win? If we put a sumo wrestler and a boxer together, or a kickboxer and a jiu-jitsu guy, which is the best martial art, who's going to win? And those early UFC fights were literally that. They didn't even have weight classes or anything like that. That is how the UFC started, as this fringe sideshow of martial arts, and it was the first promotion to really popularize that. Then as it got more popular, fighters started evolving their style, right? So if you're a boxer or a kickboxer and you keep getting beat by this jiu-jitsu guy, you're gonna get to a point where you're like, oh man, I gotta learn some wrestling, or I gotta learn some jiu-jitsu so that they don't always beat me in that specific discipline. If you're a jiu-jitsu guy or a wrestler and you're always getting knocked out, you're like, okay, I need to get better with my hands. So out of this necessity was born the sport of martial arts. And now martial artists, they train in jiu-jitsu, they train in striking, and they'll train in wrestling all together. UFC was the promotion that really led the charge in the formation of that sport and developed it. But yeah, they don't have a monopoly on the sport. There are other organizations, but the UFC is definitely at the top.